Hey guys, this is Paul with For Heaven's Sake. I'm just here to give my testimony for Testimony Tuesday. As we do these testimonies and we have different people on, it's important, I think, for us to remember that it's not about us. We may be sharing our stories, and I'm going to be sharing my story today, but really it's just one way and one individual that God works through and in. It's really, ultimately, it's all His story. It's just one example of how He works. So yeah, I just wanted to share with you guys. I was very, very fortunate as a kid. I grew up in a family with two parents who love each other, very just good, solid, moral people. Taught me that God exists. They sent me to a Presbyterian like daycare and after school care when I was a kid. But really, for me growing up, that was kind of as far as it really went. I know that I was taught about God. I'm sure that I probably heard the gospel at some point in my life, but it never really stuck. And so for me growing up, I really just I didn't really know what I was doing. I just knew that I wanted as a kid to do whatever I wanted. I was a rough child. I had anger issues. I was violent. I was always cutting up. Always an issue as a kid. And I remember in fourth grade, actually, my principal, and he was probably exaggerating a little bit. My principal actually told my parents in fourth grade that I was probably going to end up in prison if I kept going down the path I was going. So that just a little example of me as a child. But it for me, I was always kind of just acting out of boredom or pride or whatever. I looked down on everyone else. I was extremely selfish, considered myself as better than everyone else, more important than everyone else, and it showed in the way that I acted. And so for me, in middle school, I had kind of decided by that point that I just didn't really care about God. He, even if He existed, I didn't matter to me. I didn't care. I was probably just an agnostic. When I learned in high school what the word agnostic even meant, that was what I decided. Okay, that's what I am, because I believed some kind of God had to exist. But for me, real, there was no connection to my life. And for me, especially in high school, I had really bad experiences with most of the Christians that I knew. Obviously not all of them were bad, but for me, growing up, I didn't have a good example. In my mind, the concept of Christianity was linked to hypocrisy. It was people who were partying and sleeping around on Saturday night and then going to church on Sunday morning. That was kind of, in my mind, where I linked Christianity. And so for me, again, I wanted nothing to do with it. But I did have, a couple solid friends who actually did live it. And so at the very least, I respected them and I liked them. One of my good friends' name was Jordan. He features big in this. But I remember he was one of the few Christians I knew who really actually lived what he said that he believed. But it still wasn't really anything that I really wanted a part of. So when I went off to college, I spent 1 year at Georgia Tech directly out of undergrad. Not because I really just wanted to go to Georgia Tech or anything like that. I went to Georgia Tech because I was extremely prideful, and it was the highest ranked university that I got into. And so that's all I cared about. That's all I cared about. And so I went there, and it was awful. My first year was just terrible experience for me. I suffered some terrible depression, anxiety. The anger that had always been inside me just kind of just continued and grew. I was angry. I was depressed. I became addicted to pornography during that time. Video games. All I did was stay in my room and just isolate myself from the world. And in that time, I recognized something had to change. I didn't know what. I just knew that there had to be more to life than this. So anyway, I left there, ended up having to transfer out. I think my GPA was like a point 0.6, so it was fun. But when I came back, I went to a community college, local community college, and there, once I returned, one of my good friends, a few of them actually, you know, started to invite me to actually hang out and reach out to me. My friend Jordan, my friend Steven, a few other really solid Christian guys just kind of reached out to me and in my time of need really showed me what it was to love the way that Christ loves. And so in that time, I started to get interested in what does it mean to follow Jesus. I'd heard the name growing up, but there was no connection for me. I didn't even realize that Jesus was God. I just knew I was the Son of God, and that's as far as it went. I didn't care. But I started kind of really looking into that. My friend Jordan invited me to church over and over and over again. Eventually, I caved and I started going. But during that time, I really intellectually started to get a grasp and understand what it meant to be a Christian. I started getting really involved into apologetics. I eventually transferred to UNC Charlotte. Actually, was a part of the like apologetics club, Ratio Christi, there for a good while, and all of the mental side of it started really clicking for me, and so I began to call myself a Christian, and it was in that time, like I said, that the mental side was really there. I understood, I comprehended who is God, who is Jesus, what do all these things mean. I recognized the truth of it. But the reality was, God was still far from my heart. I confessed his name with my lips, but in my heart he was far from me. And in the summer of, I guess it was after my junior year, going to be before my senior year, I was up hiking in the mountains with my friend Jordan and one of our other friends, Scott. And on that day, my friend Jordan, he fell off a cliff and passed away. And for me, that was the day when I realized that I was the man who had built his house on the sand. Because my entire world just came crashing down. I didn't know what to do. I had found myself basically building my life around the love that he showed me, and that some of our other friends showed me. I realized that I didn't have a personal relationship with Christ. I was living off of the faith of others, and the person who I relied on, the person who was my rock and whose faith I lived off of, was taken away. But I say all of that. That was also the day when truly I did give my heart to Christ, not just my mind. That was the worst day of my life, but it was also the best day of my life, because I lost my best friend, but I found Jesus. And like I said, I was the man who built his house in the sand, and I know what it means to lose everything that you have anchored your life on. But God saved me from that, and I can sit here today, as a child of God, an actual child of God, not just knowing God, about God in my mind, but really truly knowing God and following him. And so, that's everything from there. It's a long journey in itself, learning what it means to love people. I can sit here today because I had a couple of friends who genuinely loved me the way that Christ loved me. And so that's my story. Really is just the love of God, reaching out to me through some of my friends, and so anyway, it's really all I have to say there. It's not really my story. Like I said, when we share these testimonies, it's really just his story, his redemption, his love, his gospel that reaches out to us. That me, a angry, violent, prideful guy, can be redeemed because Christ died on the cross for those sins. and then rose again, that I may, if I also am baptized into his death, that I could be raised again in his resurrection. So I'm just thankful for that. To God be all of the glory. And again, I just thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day. And, we're for heaven's sake. And if you don't mind, subscribe and like it. Thanks, guys.